especially as kids get beyond preschool and kind of elementary grades. You think about yourself more as a consultant to your kid than as the kid's boss or manager or taskmaster who always knows best. And there's 4 implications from this idea. And one is that most of the kids I see need help. They need tutoring, they need speech and language therapy, or they need psychotherapy. And I want them to have help, but I don't believe in trying to force it on them. I don't want them using all their energy fighting something that would probably help them a lot. But I want them to eventually come around. I probably need this. So I don't want to force help on them. We want to share our advice and our wisdom about life, but we don't want to try to ram it down their throat because it just doesn't take.
As a young mother, I experienced a paradigm shift that transformed how I saw education and ultimately the world around me. I started this podcast, The Luminous Mind, to connect with and learn from people who are disrupting the status quo in how they learn, educate, and live in the world around them. Prepare for a paradigm shift. Light a candle, light your world.
Benjamin Franklin said, "Instead of cursing the darkness, light a candle." You're listening to The Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starters are William Stixrud and Ned Johnson. When the self-driven child authors Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson began comparing notes years ago, they discovered a common problem among their young clients. Kids were stressed. Many complained that they felt powerless to shape their own destinies. Some stumbled in high school, while others hit college and unraveled. Bill is a clinical neuropsychologist who helps kids gripped by anxiety and struggling to learn. Ned is a motivational coach who runs an elite tutoring service. Together, they discovered that the best antidote to stress is to give kids a sense of control. In their book and their talks, Bill and Ned offer a combination of cutting-edge brain science, the latest discoveries in behavioral therapy, and case studies drawn from the thousands of kids they've helped. Armed with this research, they advise that parents and educators adopt the role of consultant rather than manager to give kids more responsibility for their life decisions even before they leave home. Evidence strongly suggests that age-appropriate autonomy is vital for young people's mental health, and it helps them to sculpt their brains that they are resilient, resourceful, and ready to take on new challenges. Well, welcome, Bill and Ned.
Thanks for having us, Rebecca.
Yeah, nice to be here.
It's going to be kind of fun to do this triangular thing, so hopefully none of us cut each other off. But I'm really excited to have you guys on the podcast. I really feel like, especially the new direction of our podcast, this is a perfect book to talk about. You were highly recommended by Blake Bowles, who, and I was telling him I was doing coaching for parents. And my number one question was, how do I get my kids to do X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, wow, we can't make our kids do anything. So I'm like, we got to move this to a new direction so that we're focused more on, how parents, like what our behaviors, how they're affecting our kids. But what I'd love to hear, maybe why don't each of you take some time and tell our audience a little bit about yourself? I don't know who wants to go first, but
I'll defer to the good doctor.
Well, this is Bill, and I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I've been married for 43 years to a wonderful wife, and I have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. I haven't seen my grandchildren in 9 weeks, and it's just, they live 8 minutes away. But in any case, I'm a neuropsychologist. For the last 35 years, I made a living by testing kids who have learning problems or emotional problems or ADHD or autism. I try to figure out what's wrong and how to help them. And I'm a rock and roll musician. I play in a rock and roll band, and I've been meditating for 47 years.
Well, that's cool. I think we'll talk a little bit about meditating, right? All right. That's great. And what about you, Ned? Do you want to tell?
Well, I guess I'm sort of the junior partner to all that. I've been married for 24 years. I have a son who's a senior in high school, daughter is a sophomore. Been meditating for a little less than a decade. Bill, I run a company called Prep Matters. We do academic tutoring and test prep and college counseling. So since 1993, I've basically been a tutor geek, help kids prepare for and confront the alphabet of standardized tests that are probably too prevalent in American society. But it allows me to interact with teens, and I found them pretty cool. So I'll keep doing it for a while.
Well, and how did you guys get together? Have you been friends and stuff? And then how did that work into co-authoring this book together?
There's a couple of people who knew Ned and I, and even though I'm 20 years older than Ned, my work is related in some ways, but it's different. But they said, you guys think so much alike. You'd really enjoy each other. And so we got together and found out we had a lot in common. And we started lecturing together, initially about motivation, about how do kids become self-motivated. I've been lecturing for years about stress and how chronic stress affects kids' learning and their development. And we started lecturing about motivation and stress and the optimal environments for learning. And we decided to write a book, trying to think about what should be the organizing principle of the stuff we know is helpful to parents. And Ned at one point said, I think that everything that we think is useful is related to a sense of control. So we wrote this book, The Self-Driven Child. We argue that one of the most important things we can do for kids is help them develop a healthy sense of control over their own lives. Ned, do you want to add anything to that, buddy?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And when we talk about the sense of control, there's sort of two aspects to it. One is kind of the subjective sense of autonomy, right? These are my choices, my goals. I get to have some say about this. Being in the brain sex, which kind of executive functions, the most recently involved part of the brain, regulates the rest of your brain, including the stress response of the amygdala. And so, Bill is a clinical neuropsychologist, works with a lot of kids for whom learning isn't easy, and trying to figure out how to help them be motivated when learning isn't easy, right? And I'm kind of oftentimes the other end of kids who are sometimes motivated to a fault, right? That they're kind of, obsessively or perfectionistically driven, really high expectations for themselves, but then they would go and take things like standardized tests, underperform relative to what they've been doing for practice or what their expectations were. Again, trying to figure out how to help them do their best given this anxiety. And so where Bill probably started this more almost from a clinical perspective of what's going on with stress, I really came, sort of first came to this through trying to understand from a performance perspective of what too much stress does, kind of underperformance, and then what are the things that help people be less anxious. And some of these tools are feeling a greater sense of control in a situation that can feel a little intense.
That's great. Well, and as I was listening to the book, like I said, this COVID-19, I had to listen to it, although I'm going to go buy copies for all of my friends because it's fantastic. But as I was listening to
silver linings, right?
Yes.
We're looking for whatever we can find.
Exactly. But as I was listening to this book, though, I feel like it could be like a range of people who you were talking to. It can be directed to parents. It could be directed towards the teacher. It could be even directed towards the kid themselves. Who was the main audience that you were trying to capture by writing this book?
Well, it's funny. I initially really wanted to write a book for teens because I just spend more time. I mean, I talk to the parents, but most of my work is really with kids directly. Bill probably spent more time with parents, probably, and spent a lot of time giving them great advice for decades now. So we were a little bit back and forth. Our agent, Howard Yoon, who's this incredibly wonderful guy and also very wise, sort of was the tiebreaker. And he just looked at me and he said, Ned, teenagers don't buy books. So there we have it, right? So it really was designed most for parents and also for educators, because everything we're talking about, how do you help kids develop intrinsic motivation? How do you help them perform well? How do you help them be less anxious? This is important for everyone who spends time with young people. A lot of what's in there is, of course, based on brain science and stories I think that resonate. So a lot of it really does work for kids. Actually, one of our favorite Amazon testimonials, I guess you call it, that was a mom who said she was reading the book, and at some point she was on a chapter about technology. And she said, you got to listen to this, you got to listen to this. And she said, at some point, my 14-year-old son took the book and said, I got to read this myself. And he took the book upstairs, read the chapter on technology, and came back down to his mom and said, I think I'd like your help helping me manage my use of technology.
That's cool.
So, and part of it, we work really hard to, and really suggest to parents as well, they treat kids respectfully.
Yeah.
Because one, it's just the right thing to do. And two, from whether it's relationships or brain science and performance anxiety, you just get much, much better outcomes. Because you've made this at the start of this, Rebecca said, you can't make kids do things. You can make it so friggin' unpleasant that they agree to do it. but you're really not making them do it. You can't make something do something against someone, do something against their will. So yeah, in a perfect, our probably third book will be something that's more directed right to kids, because I think it's, we think there's a lot to be said in this book that kids themselves would want, because they too want their lives to be successful.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to start with the parents, though, because you have to let the parents realize, like, kids need some control over their life. And I love, like, right at the beginning, I think it was like in chapter 3, you basically lay out like some different ways that parents need to think about their kids. Do you want to talk about that? Like, how should we change our paradigm when it comes to our children? Because we think they're ours, right? And we have this sense of like responsibility over these people.
Right.
And so
I'll just add to regarding the previous question, which is, we wrote the book primarily for parents, but figuring it's going to affect kids, and also figuring that teachers read a lot of books that are written for parents. And the last 2 years since the book come out, we've talked to dozens of school faculty.
I think this all needs to be totally in the school, personally.
There's a chapter on taking a sense of control of the school, where we talk about some schools. It's not a comprehensive treatise about how to build self-control, but we talk about some important issues in that chapter. But generally, we assume that teachers would read it as well. And the first thing that we recommend for parents and also for educators is that, especially as kids get beyond preschool and kind of elementary grades, you think about yourself more as a consultant to your kid than as the kid's boss or manager or taskmaster who always knows best. And there's 4 implications from this idea. And one is that most of the kids I see need help. That they need tutoring, they need speech and language therapy, or they need psychotherapy. And I want them to have help, but I don't believe in trying to force it on them. I don't want them using all their energy fighting something that would probably help them a lot. But I want them to eventually come around. I probably need this. So I don't want to force help on them. We want to share our advice and our wisdom about life, but we don't want to try to ram it down their throat, because it just doesn't take. One of my colleagues moved to Florida years ago and sent me a greeting card, said, "I want to give you some advice that my mother gave me, because I sure as hell won't be using it." And just the idea. So what we suggest is just get buy-in. You say, I've got a thought about that. I got an idea about that. You want to hear it? I have some advice. Do you want to hear my opinion? We just kind of get buy-in. If the kid says, "No, not really," you respect that, because usually they want to hear it. Usually they'll come back to you. So we want to offer help, not try to force it. We want to offer our opinion, our advice, our wisdom, but not. So many parents say, "I've told him 1,000 times." Don't tell him 1,000 times. Tell him once or twice and remind him. And then if it's not responding, do something different. Don't keep saying it. And the third thing is that we want kids as much as possible to make their own decisions. I just talked to somebody today they live in New York City, and they have a 17-year-old, and they got out of the city because of so much COVID there, upstate New York, and now the kid wants to go back. And they're thinking, well, it's not safe. And the kid turns 18 in 6 months. And it's this dilemma of, do the parents say, "No, it's not safe, you can't go," or do they support her and say, this is your life, you're a responsible person, let's talk to the pros and cons. And I don't know the right answer, given how serious this COVID is. But generally, we want kids, and especially after puberty, we want kids to make as much as they can to make the important decisions about their own life. And the last thing is simply that the way kids become resilient is they have a problem and they deal with it. And they deal with it by engaging their prefrontal cortex, which dampens down the stress response, and they go into coping mode. And we want kids to have that experience of coping with their own problems, because as parents, we have what some people call a righting reflex, meaning my kid brings me a problem, I say, "Here's how to solve it. You need to do this or this or that." If we do that, we deprive them of the experience of solving their own problems, which is what makes them resilient. Ned, do you want to add?
No, I think that's all right. And I think that last point is, 2 points in that the experience of handling things on your own is the only way that you wire your brain to know that it can handle things, right? We have such a tendency when our kids are struggling to want to jump in and fix and solve, because we don't want our kids to suffer. And also, it's really distressing to us to see them in distress. But when we're doing that, we're making ourselves feel better, maybe them as well, but we're missing an opportunity, because it's much better to develop the ability to save yourself, to know that you can save yourself, than have someone else, do that for you. So sometimes people hear this and say, you're saying just let your kid alone, let him suffer. And so we're not saying that at all. We're saying that we simply don't want to do for kids things that they can do for themselves. And so we want to offer help, but we don't want to make it our responsibility when it's something that very much can or arguably should be their responsibility.
Yes.
And it's just, it's not easy to do that. Partly, kids are constantly developing new abilities, and it can be hard for us to remember, this kid isn't 4 anymore. She's not 14 anymore. She can actually
that's really hard.
handle this. I remember when I think I was 12, maybe 11, my family had moved from Pennsylvania to New York, and we were upstate New York, had the moving van, and they were unpacking all this stuff. And so we're all helping move stuff. And I go to pick something up, and my mom's like, no, that's much too heavy for you. And I can distinctly remember thinking in the back of my head, woman, how could you possibly know what's too heavy for me? How? You don't live inside me. You don't see what I do all day long. So yeah, I think to Bill's point, we can offer help. We can offer suggestions, but we want to be as respectful as possible. And it's just like lifting weights. You want to spot for a kid, help him up if he needs the help, but don't lift it for him.
Yeah. I loved how in the book you actually talk about what toddlers, kind of the responsibilities you can give them all the way up, grade schoolers, middle schoolers, high schoolers, and then even beyond, which I'm starting to enter that realm of adult children who need to make their own decisions. But so I think the book is excellent in that regard. And I do feel like parents, we have a really hard time. Like we raised this child from the point he was a baby, to realize he's able to, what's appropriate to do at certain levels and the responsibility to give to him. And I thought it was interesting too, that you brought up different parenting styles, I think we're seeing more and more of the helicopter parent, which I think is interesting. I'm a Gen Xer, and we were latchkey kids where our parents had no idea where we were at most of the time. Yeah. But then we've almost switched to
and look, and there's an entire generation of people of that age who didn't end all up dead, right?
Yeah.
If there was no one from your generation, well, that's a flawed model, right?
Yeah. Well, and it did. I mean, I know my own specific self is that I've kind of turned more so, to that helicopter thing, because there was a part of me, I appreciated the fact that my parents thought I was capable and that, they just turned me loose and let me do what I needed to do. But then at the same time, I never really felt like they cared, in a way. And so then I turned the other way. And I guess it's just trying to find that good, happy medium of what's good and helpful to let our children grow and, gain all of these skills that they're going to need for the rest of their life. And then what's a way to make sure that they feel like they're cared about and that we love them and that we've got their back, that kind of thing. So do you want to talk a little bit maybe about parenting styles and how
Sure.
that might play into, how we raise our children?
Sure. This is Bill. And we talk about the three parenting styles that have been researched since the 1960s, the kind of authoritarian, it's my way or the highway because I said so style, the laissez-faire, kind of you're on your own, let's be best friends, I don't want to set limits. And the third is the authoritative, which is that we work out limits and rules, we treat each other respectfully. But I take an interest in you, I value your opinion, I support your autonomy. I see you as an independent person who has your own thoughts and feelings. And over the last 60 years, there's been hundreds of studies that have shown that the authoritative approach doesn't work very well. The laissez-faire is even worse. And this authoritative, this sweet spot, the authoritative where we set limits, and we're the guides of our family. But we aren't the authoritarian bosses. We care about, we want kids to practice making their own decisions. We treat them respectfully. And the title of the second chapter of the book that introduces this idea of thinking yourself as a consultant, it's called, I Love You Too Much to Fight With You About Your Homework. And so the idea is that from an authoritative point of view, we can make sure that we work out limits on screen time, but we don't try to fight with the kid about homework. We give up the idea that somehow we could make him do it. And it's easier said than done. One of my clients sent me an email after she read the book and she said, I just told my 13-year-old son, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And first he smiled and then he hugged me. And then he said, is something wrong with you, Mom? But this idea, we're working on a second book and focusing a lot on just getting the energy right. And the energy right means that we realize it's a kid's life. I want to support the kid. And the question about expectations you're raising, Rebecca, we have a chapter on when do expectations stop being positive and become toxic? Because there's extensive evidence that having high expectations really translates into confidence. I have confidence my kid can do well. But it can also become toxic if they're way out of line, or you have to get into a Ivy League school, that kind of stuff. If it feels to the kid the expectations are I approve of you conditionally. So what we want to do is we want to treat the kids respectfully, let them know that we love them no matter what they do, and express confidence in them so that they develop high expectations for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like the idea, like I said, in chapter 3, you talk about 3 ways like to help that parent change that mindset to this consultant type. And I always thought of it as gentle parenting, like, that you work more as that consultant, but it's not this authoritarian. I don't know why. There's all kinds of terms out there. And so I think I've confused some of my listeners before because I talk a lot about like gentle parenting. But can you help parents shift their mindset so they're not in that laissez-faire parenting, and we're not authoritarian, but we're more in that consulting thing? I think you have 3 different questions to ask yourself or something.
Well, there's Dr. Jane Nelson, who wrote Positive Discipline, makes the point of being kind but firm, right? And that the authoritative model is characterized by both high love and high discipline. And in many ways, that's the harder place to be, because it can be relatively easy to be laissez-faire and do whatever you want because I don't want to say anything to upset you, and so you can never be unhappy with me because I let you do whatever you want. And so you're overly kind, but not very firm, right? But then the authoritative, we can be firm, but not be so kind. And we all know this, that when we finally, say something really strongly to people, we often, to a spouse or a friend or a colleague at work or someone at the grocery store, right? That we oftentimes kind of like just erupt at people because we've gotten frustrated enough or angry enough or whatever, that we kind of come at them with all this energy and just kind of tell them, and at that point we let the kindness go. It's hard, or harder, I think, to be both kind and firm and to set limits and to say, here's what the expectations are, but not sort of beating people up. And if you think about yourself as a consultant, it becomes easier to do that, right? I mean, in that, if you were a consultant to my company, right, you come and say, here, Ned, I see some things and there's some things that are really going well, but if there's some things that you really need, I think you're going to need to fix, and you may not want to hear this, but your leadership style, Ned, is such and such, and if you want to be more effective, and you're telling me kind of oftentimes hard truth, but doing it in a gentle way. And because you're a consultant to me, you're not responsible for me. I can take that advice. I can hear it in the way that you intended, or I can ignore it. It's completely my choice. You can't make me take that advice because you're not the boss of me. Yeah. You're a consultant, right? And so,
well, and I think it takes the stress off of parents too, because I mean, that's another thing I'm seeing with parents is that the rest of society expects us to have such a thumb on our fingers that I think even parents are stressed out, like I'm having a hard enough time managing my own life, let alone for other people's, little people's lives.
Well, it is so true. I mean, if we feel that, I mean, again, if your kid didn't want to do something, he can just close his eyes and flop on the floor. What are you going to do? You're going to pick him up and duct tape him to the chair? I mean, you can't make him do it. And oftentimes it's the belief that if I could say it the right way, if I could do it, that I could make him do it. And that's a source of incredible frustration, not just for your kid, but for you as a parent, thinking that you can somehow do this because you kind of go in circles. But if you make peace with the fact that it couldn't be your job to do something that's technically impossible, then to Bill's point, it very much changes the energy. And I laugh because, I've spent, since 1993, being a test prep guy, and I'm trying to motivate people. I'm trying to, help change their thinking a little bit, help them be more successful. But I have neither carrot nor stick, right? I don't give them a grade. I don't give them allowance, right? I can't take away a cell phone, right? But I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to help them think about things differently so that they want to take the steps that I think will get them to where they want to be. And it's when we talk about, so many parents think they want to have power over people. And I don't want to have power over people. I want to have influence.
Yeah.
And you don't exert influence by ramming it down people's throats.
Well, I can't remember if it was in the introduction or one of the first chapters where you talked about, like, as a parent, think of all your other relationships that you have with other people. If you were so controlling over your spouse, what would that be like? If you were controlling with your friends? And then one of the things that I love too, I think it's like 6 points of why we're right. And I got 5 of them. I'm like, I don't know where I missed number 4, but I was so enraptured. But anyway, one of the things I love is that you say we don't always know what's best for our child, that it takes some humility to be that consultant parent. What would you say about that?
Well, this is Bill again. And because I have grandchildren, I've worked with kids for a really long time. And the older I get, the more humble I become about knowing what's in a kid's best interest. And partly, most certainly, maybe one of the most painful experiences, the most embarrassing experience I've ever had in my life was when I started graduate school in English literature at Berkeley, and I flunked out within 2 quarters. So I didn't turn any work in. I felt at the time that my whole life was going up in smoke. I had this fantasy about being an English professor, and it was up in smoke. So I go back and I'm working in a warehouse, just and I got fired from a job typing. And it took me about 6 weeks to realize that I always felt like an imposter with other English literature types. That wasn't me. And within 2 months, I was aware that what felt like a big disaster was actually the best thing that could have possibly happened. But I think that happens so often with kids that they have a bruise here, that they have a setback here. They often grow from it. Something good comes out of it. And so that's why the 6 points you're referring to are the rationale for letting kids make their own decisions. And the idea is they don't get to decide everything. They don't get to be the boss. It's just that after puberty, we think that one of the best messages you can give a kid besides I'm crazy about you is I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of practice doing that before you go up to college. I want you to have practice running your own life. With little kids, as you said earlier, Rebecca, a guy that I talked to recently did his doctoral dissertation on promoting autonomy in 2-year-olds. I mean, we can start early on giving kids a sense that this is your life. And I respect that you like to do it this way, not this way. Now, it's not that they get to be the boss of the family. It's just as supporting this autonomy and decision-making. It really works.
Well, and as a parent, I think the more that we can do that, the more, I think it's just a human nature to push back against anyone who's forcing us to do anything, regardless of how old you are.
Yes.
And I think as a parent, if we can allow as much autonomy as possible, but like you said, not to the point like we're allowing a 2-year-old to do something totally right. But if you can allow that, you might get greater cooperation, and you'll have less power struggles, less arguing, less fighting. What do you think about that kind of thing? Like the disciplinary thing. Some people think like if you don't control other people, you're going to have more disciplinary problems, but it really seems like less in a way.
Well, I think that if we give up the idea that we're supposed to be able to control other people, including our kids, to give up the idea that we're supposed to force them, then it gives us tremendous, at first it feels like very threatening, but eventually it feels very powerful because we align our thinking with reality. And then, as Ned said, we focus on making sure our relationship with our kid is strong and not filled with fighting, because we influence our kids in a much more positive way if we aren't fighting with them all the time. And so, Ned, do you want to comment?
Yeah, and one of the things, is we're talking about this in our second book, that most people are ambivalent about change, right? They may be in a situation where, they're doing something, I don't know, maybe they're not doing well in school, pick on that. And, kids would like to do better. Maybe they want to do better, but when they think about all the reasons why they want to do better, why that could be useful to them, they can also think about all the reasons why that's not. Like, what if it's a lot of work, or if I really try hard and then I don't succeed, then I'll be even more frustrated or look more like a dope, And so a lot of times people get stuck. And what we can often do as parents is go in there and lean heavily on, you've got to take this seriously, you've got to work hard, blah, blah, blah. And what happens is, rather than kids hearing all the reasons why we should do this, they start in their minds or in words, start arguing all the reasons why they can't. And when you get away from that idea of fighting or forcing, it creates an environment where kids are much better able to take steps in the right direction, or put more simply, where they stop fighting what's probably in their own best interest. So often it's not what parents are suggesting or what parents are asking, it's the how. Mm-hmm. And we work from the assumption that your kids too want their lives to work out. They want to be successful. And oftentimes is, how do we go about this? And, we as mature adults, shouldn't the burden be on us to be a little bit more flexible in our approach rather than asking the kids to do it the way that we want them to do it?
Yeah, I think that was one of your points, is that you've got to believe that your children want their lives to turn out just as successful as you want their lives to turn out. You've got to have that trust in them, that there's that belief. I'd love to hear a little bit about the science. That was one of the other 6 reasons why you're right, is that science is on your side as far as, with autonomy and brain function, that executive function. What's kind of the sciencey side behind it?
Well, one aspect in terms of the decision-making is that the cognitive functions for making decisions are pretty much mature by the time you're about 14 years old. So most teenagers have pretty good decision-making skills. And also, one of the really interesting scientific discoveries in the last 20 years has been, we used to think that you make your best decisions purely rationally by putting your feelings aside. And it turns out that Antonio Damasio demonstrated that if you damage certain emotional processing centers in the brain, you can't decide what to have for breakfast. The decisions are rooted in emotion. So what we want for kids is we want kids to have a lot of experience tuning into their own emotions and seeing, what do I really want? What's important to me? If I did this, how would it affect my family or my friends? So the idea is, and that's partly why we don't know what's best always. And we want kids to practice paying attention, in my experience, because I see a lot of kids where the parents want me to try to talk them into something. And I say, but I don't believe in doing that, but I'll talk with them about it. And I start out by telling kids, I don't want anybody to try to force you to do this, because you're a smart kid, and I want you to have a lot of experience making decisions about your own life. But let's think through the pros and cons together. And almost invariably, when I do that, kids can make a good decision for themselves as I could make for them, or their parents could make for them. So that's part of the science. And Ned, other science you want to talk about?
Well, one of the things is this. I mean, so Bill, they mentioned the prefrontal cortex, which a lot of your listeners probably know about, but right behind the forehead, it's where executive functions reside, right? So problem solving, creativity, and cognitive and emotional flexibility. So we put things in perspective and really, all kind of goal-directed behavior, right? As opposed to the amygdala, which is the threat response. And so when the amygdala fires, the prefrontal cortex goes offline by design. If a wild animal flees at me, I don't really want to sit there and try to contemplate his motivation. I'm supposed to react quickly to save my life. And the problem is that when the amygdala fires, all rational thought goes bye-bye. And so often as parents, we can talk with kids, and if parents are, we can do this with colleagues and spouses too, right? If I come to Rebecca, this is really important. If I do that with a lot of energy, and you feel like, whoa, your ability to really process and really hear what I'm trying to say is scrambled. And so if we want to be effective, if we really want to be effective, it's not what did I say, it's what did you hear, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'll give an example. So I have a daughter who's a sophomore in high school. She's brilliant. I mean, she's got 20 IQ points on her dad. She's also really intense. So she's currently, and we're working on it, currently anxious and currently depressed. So her reactivity is kind of high, and her brain works so much faster than mine does. So if she reacts, she's figured out she's way the heck down the road. If I want to have a conversation with her, we have to keep things at a low energy, a low pace. Otherwise, her shields are up and we're not hearing each other. And so when some of the advice that we give is, again, you offer kids advice, but even this, and I do this routinely now with colleagues and kids, mine and others, and say, may I give some advice? Is it okay if I ask you a question? Because what I'm doing there is I'm giving my daughter some sense of control. And that sense of control lowers her stress response, which basically brings down the shields and makes her much more likely that she's hearing me. So we're kind of talking prefrontal cortex to prefrontal cortex. If I just go in there and say, shouldn't you, whatever, which shields are up, and she's going to be defensive and not really going to hear. So if you remember that when people fight back at you, or they do this, it's just that, whoops, the chemistry is wrong. And so there really are effective tools to simply be more effective in communicating. And again, it's not the what so often as the how.
I love that. I actually just did an interview with a person that wrote a book, How to Have Impossible Conversations.
Oh.
Anyway, and he was saying that some of the best ways is to ask questions. And it seems the same way with our own children, that if we ask people questions, then we can have better conversations with them because their defenses come down. Is that what you're saying? Like, and then it opens up, it gives them the control of, like, if they've been asked a question, then they have the ability to control maybe the direction of the topic and how all of that may go. Is that what you're meaning? Like,
yeah, because again, if we're giving them choice, and even things like every time I'm at a school, I'll get a parent who will say, can I ask you a question about my kid? And they'll start telling me, well, so I told him this, and I told him this, and I told him this, and he just wants something. And told him, and telling me kind of all but what, basically looking for validation. Isn't that right? Don't I have that right? Wasn't that the right advice? And after they've talked for a few minutes, I'll stop and I'll sit back and I'll say, may I offer you some advice? And they say, okay. And I say, try saying to your son, may I offer you some advice? Because again, it puts the kid in control. And of course, parents then ask, but say, well, what if he says no? And if he says no, you say, okay, that's fine. If you change your mind, I'd love to share this with you. We so often think because we think it's important that our kid has to listen to it. Well, I don't have. You can have the meaning of life, Rebecca, but I don't have to listen if I don't want to. You know, I don't.
Very true.
There's this guy named Ron McGon who's a guru on communication, and he says that this is really interesting. We like this a lot. He said, in terms of relationships, you can kind of have a positive account balance or account deficit. And you make deposits into this relationship so that people will kind of hear what you want to say by either showing care or showing respect. And you make withdrawals by inconveniencing them. And so I think what I think a lot of parents do is they're trying to give advice that in their mind shows care. Like, you know, this is really important. You know, you need to do this to have a successful future, blah, blah, blah. But they may do it in a way that doesn't show respect. You know, so Bill, you need to do this if you're going to be successful in school. Well, I care about Bill and I want to be successful in school, but I've done it in a way that's not respectful because I basically told him the way that you're doing it is knuckleheaded, and if you don't listen to me, you can't figure this out without me.
Yeah. We send a lot of subliminal messages to our children, right? By just the way that we approach them with things that we think they should be doing. And just the way we give our verbal cues. Sometimes we send them messages of we don't trust them or we don't think they're capable. Or I know you talked a little bit about that too, like some of those messages that we don't intend to say to our children, but that get heard by them.
Well, you know, I was just talking to this mother. I mentioned earlier that this 17-year-old that's in upper state New York who wants to go back to New York City. And I mentioned in the book, we talk about the cost benefit of making decisions for kids. And the benefit may be that we have more experience and wisdom about things. And sometimes we may know better than the kid does. But the cost is that every time, especially again, when kids get to be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, every time you say to a kid, no, your way is the wrong way, we're going to do it my way, I know better than you do, that we want to minimize that message because we want kids to practice trusting themselves, practice tuning into their own intuition, what's right for me, tuning into the feelings I said before.
Yeah. I think a lot of adults don't. We were brought up kind of that authoritarian thing of like, you will do this and this is how. And so as adults, we end up being unhappy in jobs we don't like, and we can't recognize our own feelings and emotions because we've shoved them down so much. Does that?
I used to do a lot of psychotherapy and so often I'd sit down with a 35-year-old or a 40-year-old and I'd say, how can I help in the first session? And they'd say, I feel like I spent my whole life trying to live up to other people's expectations. Now I'm trying to figure out what's important to me. And I was thinking inside, let's get an earlier start on it.
Yeah.
And so can I just mention one other,
sure.
Really some of the science that Ned and I have felt is so powerful. It's actually one of the guys who put the sense of control on the map is Steve Meyer at the University of Colorado. He studies rats. And the basic paradigm is rat A and rat B are in a little box, and their tail's outside the box. There's a wheel inside the box. Their tail gets shocked. Rat A turns the wheel, and the shock stops. Rat B turns the wheel, and the shock doesn't stop. Rat A, when he's turning the wheel, his prefrontal cortex is activating. And when the prefrontal cortex activates, it dampens down the stress response. So rat A goes into coping mode. Even if you disconnect, the wheel doesn't work anymore. He stays in coping mode. It is not very stressed. So rat B doesn't have that sense of control. Rat B becomes extremely easily distressed. Rat B, having experienced, I can control a stressful situation, is almost impossible to stress. And so we think this is so important, given that what the Steve Meyer says is that a sense of control inoculates you from the harmful effects of stress. And given that we have these unprecedented levels of stress and anxiety and unhappiness and loneliness, even before the COVID crisis.
Oh, yeah. It's compound tenfold now.
Right. And so if the sense of control inoculates you from the harmful effects of stress, we want kids to have the experience of dealing with something stressful, activating their prefrontal cortex, trying to solve their problem. So one of the things we suggest, if you're a third grader, is the only kid in her friend group who doesn't get invited to a birthday party, or you got a 15-year-old whose girlfriend just broke up with him, and they're really unhappy, you say to yourself, whose problem is it? And it's not like, that's your problem, buddy. It's not like, it's just that respectfully, I want to realize it's their problem, not mine. So my role is not to solve it for them. My role is to be supportive, but not to leap in and try to solve it for them, because then I deprive them of that experience that they can solve their own problems.
Oh, yes.
If I could add to that science, by the way, people often ask, why do we use all this stuff with science about rats? The reason there's a lot of science done with rats is they have brain systems really similar to people, but you can do things to rats that would arguably be pretty wrong to do to children. But in addition to Steve Meyer, there's a guy named Michael Meany who did this experiment with rats and watched what happened to them if they were raised with stress, but with a very nurturing parent. And so in this experiment, they took rat pups, which are baby rats. Basically, the moment they were born, they whisked them away, and then these lab techs sat there and kind of handled little latex gloves, and they're blind, they're hairless. I mean, it's pretty stressful. But then if they gave them back after 20 minutes or half an hour, if they gave them back to mom, and mom was a high licking and grooming rat, which is the kind of rat equivalent of hugs and kisses, the cortisol, the principal stress hormone, would flow out of these little bodies, and they'd be like, oh, thank goodness. And what Meany did was do this day after day after day until these pups reached maturity, and then looked at what had happened to their brains. And there was this incredible connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And actually, the single best marker for mental health is how strong are those connections between the prefrontal cortex that put things in perspective and the stress response. Because something stressful happens and your brain goes, just like Bill was talking about with the rats in the cage and the spin the wheel, they go into coping mode. Now here, these baby pups, all that they had the experience was going from really intense, like, oh my goodness, to oh, thank goodness. And mom rat didn't go in there and save them, didn't do the homework for them, didn't do anything more than be affectionate and warm and nurturing after this difficult experience. And so you talked about the very beginning, worried about helicopter parents. And it seems to us that as helicopter parents, we can make two mistakes. One, we deprive kids of the opportunity to handle things, to be in stressful, struggling situations, because we don't want to see them. Well, let me fix that for you. Let me solve that. And we take away that growth that comes from meaningful struggle. And we don't let home be a safe base. We don't make it low enough stress, because when we are hyper vigilant, constantly looking for problems, we can't be fully relaxed and be the equivalent of that there, high licking and grooming mom rat.
Yeah. In fact, that moves me to the next thing that I'd love to talk about. You know, in the book, you talked about tolerant stress versus toxic stress and how parents need to make our home like that safe space. And I really, there was part of the book that I was somewhat cringing. I've had depression issues in my life, and I've tried to,
me too.
You know, not let it show to my children, and then found out later on, like, they were catching those clues the whole time. Like, talk about like the climate for learning and how those stresses can affect, you know, those emotions can affect learning, you know, maybe that tolerant and toxic stress and how those might be different.
So you want to jump in first?
So the scientists say there's three kinds of stress. There's positive stress, like I'm excited about, I'm a little pumped up for a game or musical performance. I got kind of jitters a little bit, I got butterflies. That's positive, that really, it's your brain really optimizing to perform well. There's tolerable stress that my parents divorced, or, I flunked a grade, or something was really stressful, but it doesn't go on forever. My parents are loving and supportive, right? My grandparents are, whatever. And there's toxic stress. And toxic stress is unrelenting and or a lot of stressful situations and very little support. And I wanted to be clear that as much as we want kids to solve their own problems, we don't want them to be chronically stressed. And I say that in part because the optimal mental state for learning is relaxed alertness. You got to be focused. But if you're too stressed, you have enough alertness to really to pay attention. But if you're too stressed, you can't learn at all. And so we want kids, for the most part, to not be very stressed. And then when something stressful happens, let them figure it out with our support, with our loving support. And ideally, home, Rebecca, is a safe base. Play the role of a non-anxious presence. And it doesn't have to be perfect. What we want to be modeling for kids, it's not fearlessness. It's not, just happy face all the time. We want to model courage. And if you have depression, dealing with depression takes a ton of courage. And one of the things you can model for your kids, if they're picking up that mom's sad or whatever, is that I'm really dealing with this. I know that a lot of the thoughts that I have are irrational. I'm really working hard to remind myself about what's real. Even with quite young kids, you can really, if you're struggling, let them in a little bit on it, but model the courage, the struggle, the fact that you're going to beat this kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what about anxiety? That was another thing that you talked about, that kids can pick up our anxiety and, can end up not modeling that well. Just our own anxiety over what they're doing can relate into how they handle anxiety throughout their life, right? Is that?
Well, yeah. I mean, and part of it is our children have spent their lifetime, watching our faces. If you have a little baby, right, looking at you, and you look at them and you screw up your face and make it angry or intense, you can make them burst into tears just by looking at because your face will respond to that. And as kids get older, this continues on. They're constantly looking at our faces for clues about, are things okay, or are things unsafe? And one of the things we want to be awfully careful about, saying one thing when the opposite is true. I mean, if you say to your kids, everything's fine, don't worry about it, right? But our face is screwed up and shows all of this fear or anger. My goodness, what do they do with that? Do they believe what mommy or daddy is telling them, or do they believe what they're actually feeling? And that's a cognitive dissonance we really don't want to have. The other thing is that, particularly when kids go through adolescence, they become incredibly attuned to other people's feelings because they're supposed to, but they're just not that great yet at explaining them. Right. And so if they can see that, gosh, mom's having a hard time, she must be upset about something, the kids will so often default to, they're upset, mom's upset near me, so therefore she must be upset with me. Or if you say, today's been a hard day for me, I was thinking about something that happened a long time ago, and I still get sad when I think about it. So if I seem a little weird today, I'm sorry. I'm just it's one of those days when I just feel kind of sad. Well, then this changes it, because they're not thinking that they're in trouble and we're worried, like, what's going on? And it also, you're modeling vulnerability, right? You're modeling truthfulness, and that hard feelings are part of life. And it also arguably puts them in a position where they can say, well, that's okay, mommy, I'm sad too sometimes. Would you like me to get you a cookie, or whatever they would do to try to make you feel better? That's such a healthier and more accurate, living and learning environment than for us to always act like nothing's wrong, even though, you're a human being, you have hard feelings, I'm a human being, I have hard feelings.
Yeah. I think that's what I really loved about your book. And it's one thing I had to learn the hard way through parenting, that we have to be really great models for them on a myriad of situations, of positive emotions, negative emotions, how we learn, how we do all that kind of stuff. And I love that about your book. What about downtime? We live in a society now that is just constant go, go, go. We have our kids in numerous activities, to be good parents. We have to keep them busy, and we have to keep them, active and doing all of these things. Do you have any advice to parents about how, not being incessantly busy might be more helpful to their children?
Yes. We have two chapters, one called Radical Downtime. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that I flunked out of graduate school at Berkeley in English, but when I was there, I read a book written by a physician called The Causes of Increased Nervousness in Americans. And it was written in 1881. And the hypothesized causes of what this physician was perceived to be in the late 1800s, this increased nervousness in his patients, were things like the railroad and Western Union and the pocket watch, things that made life go faster and made us more attentive to small units of time. You magnify that by 10,000, given our lifestyle now. And you think about how fast-paced everything is. That if somebody doesn't download in 10 seconds, it's so frustrating. And so the idea is that the balance between rest and activity in our lives are so way out of whack. And the pace of life is so fast that we need more radical downtime. And by radical downtime, we mean what you're doing looks like it's a waste of time, but what we're actually doing is extremely beneficial for your mind and body. It includes time for mind wandering and daydreaming. And that's because extensive evidence shows that if kids have time just to think, just to be in their own head, even if they're a little bored, that it leads to better problem solving, creativity, to a stronger sense of self, sense of identity, and to better empathy for people. Yeah. And we also are big fans of meditation. We both practice meditation. We both want to see kids and parents practice meditation. We see meditation as really a really important antidote now to this chronic stress and rush glued to a screen. Being able to go within one's own self and experience that very deep, peaceful level of what your own mind is becoming increasingly important. And the third form of radical downtime is sleep. And Ned, you and I both talk, but you love.
Well, in part because this was probably the first arrow in my quiver to try to help kids perform better. And one of the things that's been interesting with this COVID and Corona is that a lot of things have been disrupted, some in a bad way and some in a good way. Because I do stuff, all this work with test prep, I'm oftentimes, paying attention to how kids are doing with scores, understandably. And a bunch of the kids I'm working with are doing fantastically better now on their practice test than they were a couple months ago.
Wow, that's
and
awesome.
Was trying to figure this out. And to a one, it's because they're getting more rest. And so I've asked a couple of kids, and I get answers like, so how much are you sleeping now? Like, I don't know, like 10 hours a night. And I said, well, how much did you used to sleep? Like 6 hours a night. And I said, I want you to hold on to this. I want you to put a pin in this and remember this, because what you're experiencing right now is what your brain is able to do when it's fully rested. Yeah. Because most of the time people are running around chronically sleep deprived. And the reason this is, it disrupts all those executive functions. The effects look very similar to having ADHD. The biggest thing that I share with kids is this: when you have insufficient sleep, it elevates cortisol, which is the principal stress hormone. And so the effects of sleep insufficiency on the brain look a lot like the effects of stress. And I said the easiest way you experience this is when you know that you've experienced when you're really tired, you feel like kind of the whole world's dark, everyone's cutting you off in traffic, your friends are being jerks. I said, I had this boy I was working with, he was hilarious. He's a super bright kid, both anxious and ADHD. So it's a complicated brain. And I said this guy, I said, you ever notice how really tired your mom's like even more annoying than normal? And without missing a beat, because really fast brain, he goes, my God, I must be tired all the time. Just how, right? But this is what we feel like. I'm like, your spouse, your parents, like everybody, oh my goodness. And it's simply that this is what sleep insufficiency does to your brain. I mean, New York City, we've been up there, is known for being, everyone's yelling at each other in traffic and being, I'm in a hurry, and all this kind of stuff. But it's also known as the city that never sleeps.
That's interesting. Right? That is very true. Yeah. I mean, like I said, the neuroscience in the book's amazing. The things that we're asked to do to model to our children. I'd love you to talk just a little bit about creating that inner drive for kids. I mean, in the book, you discuss various types of children. You got the Hermione Granger who has that inner drive, who isn't sleeping because she's trying to get all the studying done and all that stuff, to the Eeyore who doesn't think they can, to the child that's disinterested. I mean, that's what I hear all the time, like, oh, well, it must be easy for you. Your kids are naturally self-motivated, because I tend to have more Hermione Granger type children than the Eeyore or the disinterested kids. But
It's interesting. An important point when we're talking about motivation, there's intrinsic motivation and there's extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is I'm working hard, but not just that I'm working hard, but that I want to work hard. Like we want our kids to do well in school, but more fundamentally, we want them to want to do well, right? Where extrinsic is carrots and sticks. And extrinsic motivation works beautifully, but it never transmogrifies into, it never morphs into intrinsic motivation, right? So if you threaten the heck out of me or bribe me, I've probably all kinds of things that I do that I don't really want to do, but because it's not the thing, it's the reward or the punishment I'm trying to avoid. So the question that you're, I think, really asking is how do you develop intrinsic motivation? And even those Hermione Grangers, a lot of times they're not intrinsically motivated. It's they're trying to be perfect because they fear what will happen if they don't continue to be perfect, right? And that's still externalized, right?
Yeah.
So there's a model of what's called self-determination theory, which is a model of intrinsic motivation. And it holds very elegant, holds we need three things. We need a sense of competency, a sense of autonomy, and a sense of relatedness. So if I'm terrible at math and I feel like I'm useless and I'm the worst, I don't want to work harder to get better. I don't want to do it at all, right? I need a sense of autonomy that it's my choice, it's my control. I get to have some say over this. I'm not just, being told what to do. And I need a sense of relatedness. So this is why great teachers are worth their weight in gold, right? Because they don't just get kids to work hard, they get kids to want to work hard. And so the challenge is with parents, it's too easy for us to lean hard into that competency, thinking, well, if only he were better at this, then he'd really feel good about himself and be motivated. And we spoke with Edward Deasy, who's one of the guys who put this together decades ago. And it's one of the most supportive models in all of psychology, hundreds and hundreds of studies. And we said, it seems to us that if we're going to lean on one of these three things, that it really should be autonomy. Is that right? And he said, unquestionably, in part because every year the kids are in school, they experience less and less and less autonomy, right? Think about when you're 4 or 5, you get to figure out what do you want to do with free time, right? And when you're 14 or 15 or 18, you have to raise your hand to go to
time.
Yeah, you have to raise your hand. You have to raise your hand. May I go to the bathroom? What? I need permission to go to the bathroom? I'm giving you a break. And so what we suggest is that we do everything we can to keep in mind that this is the three-legged stool, right? That we want to help kids develop skills, but we want to support their autonomy. And we want to also do that in a way that we maintain our relationship with them. And this is back to being the consultant. I'm here to help, but I'm not here to make you do this. I'd like you to do this, but I'm not going to try to make you do this because this is your life. I'll do anything I can to support you. I love you, chapter of a book. I love you too much to fight with you about homework. But I'll do anything I can, but I can't do anything I can to help. And for us, the most important outcome of high school is not where you go to college, even though I'm a test prep guy. It's developing the brain that you're going to carry into adulthood. And so we want kids to use childhood and adolescence to pay attention to what they like to do and to work really hard at the things. One of the, there's a guy named Reed Larson we talk about, who talks about the passionate pursuit of pastime. The kids don't become intrinsically motivated by dutifully doing their homework. They do it by really digging into things that they love, whether it's sports or art or coding or rock climbing or, small engine repair or the part-time job or whatever, the things that they really get into. Because so often for school, they do what they need to get the marks that are good enough. And then that's it. But with a pastime, you want to do it all the time. And there's no A and you're done. You're constantly pushing and working to get better. So do you want to talk a little about your experience with music and that?
Sure. Parents often have the idea that to maximize a kid's potential, they have to be kind of working at the top every moment. And kids who feel that they constantly have to be driven to achieve their potential, they burn out. They don't reach their potential, they burn out. And the idea is we want kids to work hard and we want kids to play hard. And what you're referring to, Ned, is that when I was in high school, I graduated from high school with a 2.8 grade point average. And I have no memory of turning in an assignment on time. I never got past page 75 in a book. And it just wasn't a big priority for me. I was an avid rock and roll musician. I played in a band. It was really the most important thing in my life. And on school nights, I tell myself, I'll learn a song, I'll practice the organ or the guitar for a few minutes, and then I'll study. And I remember this vividly, coming out of this little room where I had my organ and the guitar, 2 or 3 hours later, having no idea what time it was, having been completely absorbed in what I was doing. And oftentimes I'd think I'd been in there half an hour, I'd been in there for 2.5 hours later. So the idea was, in doing that, I was experiencing a brain state that combined high focus, high energy, high determination, high effort, and low stress. And ideally, as much of our adult life, that's where we want to be. We want to be focused. We want to be engaged. We want to be motivated. We want to be goal-directed, but not highly stressed. And so what Reed Larson says is that's the way you sculpt the brain. So I see that self-motivated. And so I see a lot of kids who are incredibly motivated for dance or sports or the various things you were mentioning, Ned, but aren't particularly motivated for school. And what I say to them is, I don't worry about you. I think at some point you're going to need to take school more seriously. But I know that once you do, you're going to be able to go pedal to the metal, because I know you're sculpting a brain that's so used to that brain state of high effort, high energy, high focus, high determination, low stress. And when school becomes more important, you're going to be able to turn on the jets.
Yeah. Well, and another thing, that's what I love about your book, is I think that as parents, we need to flip our feelings of what's important. And a lot of us are focused on grades or on the right college, or, trying to set our children up for success. What the goal is basically is like, let's develop healthy brains and some autonomy, emotional intelligence, those types of things. I think that's really what we want for our children, is that they have the drive to learn whatever they feel empowered to learn. And then also, that they're mentally and emotionally healthy people.
When you think about your own life, right? Like, do you have the sense, for everyone who's listening to this, do you have the sense that your life would be profoundly better, right, if you had married someone who went to a school that was 2 points higher on the ranking of U.S. News and World Report colleges? Does anyone really think that, right? Or when we reflect back on high school, do we remember most what our GPA is versus, music or sports or dances or time with friends? I mean, I'm still in academia, and I can remember so little of what I actually learned in school, but I can remember all these other things that really helped form who I am as a person. The person who put Bill and me together is a woman who's a college counselor, and from my perspective, the best on the planet. She's unbelievably wise. And she, years ago, she told me, she said, I've told this to people for years, and nobody believes me, even though I'm a college counselor. She said, but here it is, that whom you marry matters so much more than where you go to college.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you think about that emotional intelligence, right, which goes back to, as Bill said before, if the emotional parts of your brain are damaged, you can't figure out what to have for breakfast. Well, goodness, at the age of 10 and 12 and 14 and 16, if you're not spending a lot of time trying to figure out what you want out of life and for yourself and how you're going to contribute to this world, good luck designing a successful life. I have a student I just got a text from her. She's transferred colleges happily to a place that could be better fit for her. And I remember asking her at the start of her senior year, I said, what do you like best to do? What do you most enjoy in life? And she said, I have no idea. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, I spend all of my time and energy trying to meet other people's expectations for me. I don't know what's most important to me.
Wow. And
I thought, this is a young woman who's 18, who's about to go off to college with fistfuls of her parents' money, and she has no idea, she has no direction what way to go, right? My wife's a Latin teacher, and one of the best quotes, Roman statesman Seneca said, for the person who doesn't know the port that he's seeking, the direction that he's seeking, no wind is favorable. You have to know where you want to go.
Yeah.
And that's such an important part of high school, is figuring out, and you don't have to know all the answers, but goodness, don't you want to spend time thinking about what's important to me?
Well, and hopefully as a parent, we're looking at the long game, not just high school to college, and then, once we get that degree, we're going to be set. I think that's where a lot of our young people now are feeling very disenfranchised because they got through that, and then they're like, well, okay, I got all of these things that you said, and I'm not, the A-list that I thought I was going to be.
And from my point of view, Rebecca, and I think Ned and I share this point of view, the whole thinking about life, you have a better life if you go to a more elite school, it's just not true. Virtually any metric that where you go to college, especially for families that are, at least assuredly for families who are middle class or upper middle class, it makes almost no difference in terms of how much money you make, how successful you are career-wise. Your life has no connection with how happy you are. And when you look at the mental health crisis on college campuses, including the most elite colleges, you think this couldn't be really what I want for my kid to go where the majority of kids are seeking mental health services, very high levels of suicidal ideation, huge level of drug use. Affluent kids who go to high achieving school are much more likely than middle class kids to have anxiety, depression as teenagers, and as young adults to be diagnosed with a chemical use disorder. Mm-hmm. So the idea that somehow, I talked with a group of leaders in Houston, high school students, a couple months ago, and I said, how many of you want to be happy as an adult? And they embarrassed a little by the question. They all kind of sheepishly said, sure, we all do. What do people tell you about what it takes to be happy as an adult? And one guy said, well, basically, if you get into a good enough college, then your life is set. That's a really bad answer. And I'm not faulting the kid. Because
that's what's been drilled into them for,
Look at the science of happiness, that what makes people happy. After a fairly modest amount of income, making more money doesn't make you, it makes you happier for a month or so if you get a big increase in money, but after that, you go back to your baseline level. And what really makes people happy is not status. It's not power. It's relationship. It's service. It's meaning. And I think we give kids these terribly toxic messages by having the idea that somehow, if you don't go to the most elite school, your life is going to suck.
Yeah. And like you said, all those experiences, relationships, those things are the things that really matter. Okay, just one more question about kids in particular. I've been told before, and I don't have ADD. Well, I don't know. I think I do have a child that's ADD. and I'm a little bit that way too. But hey, autistic or learning challenges or whatever, I can't give my children autonomy. And I love your section in the book. You actually talk about those. Do you want to talk about maybe how those techniques of autonomy actually help children with those learning challenges?
This is Bill. I'll start. And the idea is that, let's take ADHD as an example. Well, that all the interventions for ADHD basically have been to try to get kids to do stuff. Let's find the right reward, the right kind of structure, the right kind of compliance training. I'm the boss, and we're trying to motivate the kid through rewards. And those things can be effective in the short term for getting kids to do stuff, or for getting them to stop doing stuff that's annoying. However, it does nothing to develop intrinsic motivation. And my experience is, having worked for 40 years with kids, is that you can't become independent if you don't have a sense of autonomy, if you don't have a sense that this is my life, and I'm going to get out of what I put into it. There's a program for for families, parents of adolescents on supporting autonomy. But there's been very little research in autism, for example, on supporting autonomy. I think my own feeling is that the reason such a small percentage of even very bright, college-educated people with autism hold a job, there's a fairly small percentage. They grow up without that sense of agency or autonomy. So I think in the book, in that chapter on kids who have special needs, we talk about the particular challenges for parents and educators of supporting autonomy, but we also underline some ways to do it, and how crucial it is that we start shifting our thinking to they can't become independent unless they develop that sense of autonomy, a sense of control over their own life.
I love that because, like I said, I teach these coaching classes, and then parents that have some, extenuating circumstances, they always think that trying to get that autonomy is actually, they can't do that with their kids. And so it's a great chapters on how that actually helps.
So much of the science, is based on primates, and it's based on rodents, right? I don't know about these children, right? But it's hard to imagine even the most ADHD kid, has organizational skills that are substantially better than that of your typical rodent. So give me a break, right? And we understand, that it's hard with kids who struggle with inattention, and who struggle with organization, struggle with all, because with all the different things that can make learning and life hard. But because we know that brains develop in the ways that they are used, that's the foundational breakthrough of the last 30 years of neuroscience, is a neuroplasticity. And you have kids that say, well, I know that the prefrontal cortex isn't done, isn't baked in, until they're at least 25. It's like, would you want to wait until age 25 to allow kids to start making their own decisions? Because one of the things for me is that I want kids to make decisions for themselves as much as they can. And when we say, unless it's crazy, meaning unless almost anybody you can think of and say, that is a spectacularly terrible idea.
Yeah, talking to the aunt, the uncle, whatever, and if they disagree. I love that part.
Because, it can be the case that Bill has a better idea than I do. His way may be the better way. But that doesn't mean that mine's easy. And part of it is that when kids have to, and for adolescents, really, not only should they, we kind of shouldn't insist that they make their own decisions because they need that practice. But also, when kids have to make decisions, they have to own it, right? They have to own it. So we get this all the time. Like, well, I made my kid do that. Well, here's the problem. If it's not working out well, your kid is going to constantly say, Dad, I told you it was a terrible idea. I knew this was going to be a disaster. And they're kind of invested in their own failure. If they have to own the decision and it's not going well, chances are they're going to double down, making it work somehow because, one, they want to be successful, but two, teenagers want to be right. And so they want to do everything they can to avoid having mom or dad say, I told you that was a terrible idea. They're going to work like nuts to make that decision work. And so, again, this is why even for kids who struggle with ADHD, we want them to work hard at making their own decisions and being committed. We say, I trust that you can make good decisions. And I know that when you make a mistake, which you will because you have a human brain, that you'll be able to figure out what to do from there. Because what is life apart from constantly saying, what next? What next? What next?
Yeah, it's a great chapter, especially like autism or those learning challenges. I think the biggest obstacle maybe that parents have is it takes them longer. They might not come around to it as quickly. Maybe it's a time issue for the parents that they can't be patient enough to wait it out. Do you think that might be it? Like it's maybe a time issue, control, I don't know.
I think that a part of it, we virtually never get pushback about the basic ideas in the book. What parents do say is it's hard. And it's hard. You say, okay, I'm going to trust my kid on this. You have to sit on your hands and zip your lip, which causes you to experience a low sense of control. And there's nothing more stressful than a low sense of control.
Yeah.
That's why the second book is trying to make this easier, trying to give more tools for parents to make this transition and make them know that it's safe to do this.
Part of the problem might be is we are watching them like a hawk, like society tells us we need to. And it's just like, we can't sit on our hands because I don't know how to describe it, but I'm like, we don't have anything else going on. So
I had a kid I worked with who was brilliant, but organizationally, probably still on the JV team, right? And he went to an independent school here outside DC, and he lived on the other side of the Beltway, where it goes around DC. And so every day he's probably 35, 45 minutes in a car every single day. And his mom described it, that he would sit there every day and he'd be basically typing papers on his cell phone, like, a letter at a time. And she's like, oh my goodness. And she said it would be so much easier if he would just do this, if he'd start a few days before not doing it. And I kind of smiled and I said, my suspicion is it'd be easier for you. And she's like, ugh. And she says, you have no idea how hard it is for me to watch him waste so much time. And somewhat unhelpfully, maybe helpfully, I said, you know what my advice is? Don't watch.
Don't watch, yeah.
Don't watch, because it's his job to figure this out. If it makes you crazy, just act like it's all good and go do something else.
That part of the book reminded me of how I feel about my daughter. I finally had to just turn her education over to her dad because I'm like, I can't watch this anymore. It's driving me crazy. But because he's not around, he's not watching it, and then I'm like, well, I guess it's up to you two to figure that out.
So one of the formative experiences of my life was early on, I worked with so many underachievers. And I was trained in family therapy, and so I use a family therapy technique, and I say, if you don't turn in an assignment, who's most upset? And invariably, the kid would say, my mom. And then I'd say, who's next most upset? And the kid would say, my dad. I'd say, who's next most upset? My teacher. Who's next most upset? My tutor, and then my therapist. And the kid was never on the list. And it just seemed, I realized that where adults are spending 80 units of energy trying to get the kid to work, and the kid will spend 20. And if the adults get more anxious and ratchet up to 90, the kid will spend 10. And my experience is it doesn't change until the energy changes. It's hard to do because we have to trust the kid. And parents often say, well, you're saying just let them fail. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying offer all the help that they need. I want kids to have any help that they need. But I don't want to force it. I don't want to take responsibility for something that's actually their responsibility.
Exactly.
Then I weaken them.
I love it. Well, just two more questions. I've already taken away too much of your time. But what habits do you feel are most helpful for us to mentor or for us to model or even for us to try to teach our children?
I think certainly the top of my list would be a consistent sleep routine.
Okay.
And just letting kids know that I function so much better if I get 8 hours of sleep than 6. So I'm going to go to bed. And we suggest that families basically have some family meeting once in a while about how are we doing in terms of staying well rested as a family. Because all of us, I mean, most of the adults are sleep deprived. Kids are definitely sleep deprived.
Yeah.
And we've been working together as families to support each other and getting enough rest. And so I think we want to model a consistent, regular sleep routine and develop that habit. That may be the key to so many of the others. Ned, do you want to?
Oh, I mean, that was my my first answer too, but we can play Family Feud and I'll go down the line for the next one. Because we're in the middle of talking about working on a second book about communication, we talked a lot about modeling generally. And one of it is that because when kids get anxious or they're angry, they're frustrated, they can struggle to come up with good solutions. They kind of get stuck, right? They're gone down a tunnel. They don't know what else to do. And then we as parents often pluck them out or they come running to us for help. We want kids to practice, when things don't go well, going, what do I do here? And so one thing that for kids often look at parents and think that their mom and dad have all the answers. And what I think can be helpful is to make visible to them when we're struggling to figure something out, when we don't know what the right answer is. And so that can be, sort of talking to yourself out loud when you're going through this and you say, gosh, I'm really having this hard time with this thing, and enlist their help, even if they don't, even if you don't necessarily need their help for the answer, to let them kind of behind the curtain and say, I'm trying to figure this out. I told my friend I was going to do this other thing, but this other thing came up here, and I really want to go to both, but gosh, or whatever you can come up with, and let kids see that you're not perfect. And that you struggle with these things as well, and that you're trying, and just kind of work through problems either out loud or with their help, because we want kids to know that that's part of life, that they're not supposed to have answers all the time, and that it's also an important part of life to ask for help, not to have someone else solve it for you, but to reach out for help, kind of know who's part of your team, because when you talked before about kids who are perfectionistic, who will do everything on their own. And they need to be perfect, and that leads to some bad outcomes. Or people who just, well, okay, forget it, I'll give up on it, and why even bother? But when we work through problems to try to do it in a way that's visible and let kids see, us be less than perfect, knowing that we can bounce back from. I wish I'd said that differently. I think I made my brother a little upset about that, but it's probably okay. And kind of verbalize, he'll probably, we get along well, I'm sure I can make it up to him next time, to kind of verbalize these things so kids can see see our thinking as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love the transparency that you might have with your children and help them work through that problem. It kind of reminds me of a meme that I saw once, and I was showing it to my daughter, and it said something like, the biggest thing I learned as an adult that my parents never had all the answers. And she's like, well, I already know that. Like, I'm not even putting on a good show for you or anything. Anyway, but at the same time too, it helped me feel like I've been real and transparent with my children, so that they know that I'm not perfect, I don't have all the answers, and that we can move through this together. And I love how you model that. You have to show them, right? I mean, that's probably, instead of lecturing how we should do something, just talking about, talking it through with your own life sometimes is really helpful for them to get the message without feeling like you're lecturing them about something, right?
Absolutely.
That's really well said.
And I'll just very, very parenthetically add, I think one of the best habits that parents can model for their kids is apologizing. And especially if we overreact and we yell at a kid, we're trying to force, we're doing something, we realize that later that's the wrong thing. I'm 70 years old. I don't remember exactly anymore, but I remember when I was 40 or 50, I could still remember specific incidents when my father gotten mad at me about something at bedtime. He'd come in and sat in the bed and apologized to me. And it made me feel so respected. And I think that the idea, if we want kids to be respectful of the people, we want to treat them with respect. If we want them to apologize, you see kids who better say you're sorry to grandma. That's not very effective. It's much more effective to model real contrition. And I'm sorry, I overreacted. I didn't do the most precious thing to me. I was too tired. I was too stressed. And explain to them why we overreacted. But that's really one of the powerful ways to connect with kids.
It's a powerful way to connect with any child, because we were having a heated discussion at dinner one time, and my son's girlfriend was there, and my husband got angry at my son. He said something very condescending about himself, and my husband didn't like him saying that stuff about himself, and so he kind of came down hard on him. And then later on the conversation, he apologized to him, but that blew my son's girlfriend away. She's like, I've never seen an adult ever apologize, to a kid or to, and so it's powerful regardless of who you're working with to apologize to them. I love that.
And the last piece that if I could add to that, is talking to, you were saying earlier, that there's so many important things that we can model and, to our kids, and really could or should. But to echo Bill's point, none of us is a perfect parent, and kids don't need perfect parents. And one of the things that being willing to or being able to apologize, isn't another thing that we need to do perfectly, but it's a way for us to simply say we have to be good enough parents. And that we can let ourselves off of that. Because remember that apologizing is not only sort of setting things right with the other person, but setting things right within ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. That, I did the best that I could, and gosh, I wish I'd done that differently. I was really tired. I was really, upset. And I regret that I said that to you, because, it was wrong of me to do it. And I'm sorry that I was so harsh about it. But I'm also, it's like restorative justice, right? I'm trying to get things back right with my kid. But then I also don't spend the next days or weeks or whatever either justifying bad behavior by myself or beating myself up ad nauseum. Because if you're above ground and breathing, you're imperfect. Yeah. There's nobody on this planet who does things perfectly. And so the ability to apologize is just a way to let ourselves off the hook, to make things right with our kids, and to your point, to show respect to children as well. Because, we're not, borrowed from Julie Lithcott-Hames, we're not raising children. We're trying to raise adults. Oh, and awesome. And I would apologize to Bill. I would apologize to Rebecca if I goof things up. And so why would I not do that with my children as well?
Yeah. Well, and I kind of wonder, like with the apology thing, my brain is exploding thinking about this, but if we did that more as parents, maybe children would realize they don't have to be perfect, and maybe that would cut down on child suicide and stuff, because I think that's what drives it a lot of like, oh no, I messed up. I'm never going to recover from this. And, so they end the situation anyway, okay. Well, there's not even any question about it.
No, I used to apologize to my kids. I'd say, I'm not going to torture myself about this because I don't expect myself to be perfect. I did overreact, and I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't trust you. I know I can trust you, but I'm sorry I acted like I couldn't trust you. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to beat myself up forever about it. Good, I'll forgive myself. I just wanted to say that to you.
That's great.
I love that.
All right. Well, you've already talked about how you're already collaborating on another book. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? And I'd love to hear. Just like pre-sell it,
The working title is What Do You Say? And what it is our agent who read the book and has a couple kids. It's like, God, this is what it would be great. Have a little bit shorter book that has a lot of dialogue, has a lot of the language used to implement these concepts. Mm-hmm. And so the first chapter of the book is about really connecting and empathy and validating kids, and really listening carefully, spending time alone with kids, and communicating that we really care about as people. And there's a chapter on the language of a parent consultant. How do you phrase things in a way to get buy-in? You have an opinion about something. How do you let a kid know without it feeling like you're forcing on them. And we talk about decision making. We did a chapter on expectations and how to if we want high expectations for kids. As I said before, we don't want them to be toxic. Mm-hmm. And like that, there's chapter on a couple chapters on the language of motivation, the language of helping kids change, talking with kids about sleep and technology, talking about kids about what makes people happy, what makes people successful, what does success feel like, and some of the dialogues that we can have with our kids to help them understand the world better and feel loved and develop that motivation.
That sounds like a fantastic book. I had tons of questions on technology and all of that, but we got to leave something for the readers to look at the book about. But a great, great dialogue. I love, because that really is the struggle of like, how do I say it? We can talk about the concepts all the time, but definitely, how do I approach this is the most important thing for sure. Right. Okay, that's awesome. Well, and, as we say goodbye, do you guys have any final parting advice for our listeners? And then give us contact information, how we can find out more about you and what you're doing.
The contact information, we have a website. It's selfdrivenchild.com. We also have a Facebook group where people have seen our talks or listened to us on podcasts like this or read the book. You can join the group. There are just 3 quick questions to make sure you're not a robot. Bill and I will be there Friday. For now, it's been Friday afternoons, just talking about whatever seems to be kind of in the news and aspects of our book. That's probably the way that most people are staying engaged with us. Parting thoughts. Well, for me, I'll say that, assuming that COVID is still going to be a real part of life, parenting has never been easy. And this can be really hard, particularly if there are financial strains, if there are illnesses. I mean, you kind of take the normal challenges of parenting and throw a whole bunch more in the mix right now.
Yeah.
And my advice for both for kids and for parents, and this may sound silly after we've just spent all this time talking about what we as parents can do better. But one of the things in some ways to be to lower our expectations, because you made mention about struggling with depression a little bit. And I had that, very much through high school and college. And, if I get too stressed, I can go to a pretty dark place pretty quickly. And I know that I got through college in many ways by just lowering my expectations. And I still want to be successful. And I've ended up being successful in all kinds of wonderful ways. But when things were really hard, I would just remind myself that I'm doing the best I can. Do I want to do better? Yes, I do. And I'll keep moving in that direction. But for right now, I'm doing the best that I can. And I think we want to be at least as gentle, at least as kind with ourselves as we are to other people, because this is just for now, and we just want to keep on going. And if we can be self-compassionate that way, because it lowers our stress and we stop shooting on ourselves, as Roger Ellis would say. It allows us to think better because we have that same prefrontal cortex, and we're actually going to solve our problems better and be more flexible and put things in perspective by lowering our expectations, at least for now.
I love that.
I love that, Ned. And I'll just add that one of my major motivations for writing this book with Ned was that I want parents to know that it's safe to trust your kid and not to worry about them all the time, not to feel you have to push them all the time. That we live in a country that is very forgiving, that kids can fail at things and turn themselves around, that so much of what happens with kids is related to brain development. As Ned said, brain development is so protracted. I just got Christmas cards from a couple of people who I hadn't seen in years, just telling me that they say, you were right. The kids turned out great, even though they were hot messes at various times. And that we have so much on our side in terms of brain development, and we love our kids, enjoy being with them. We want to encourage them to work hard and to play hard and to rest hard, but that we don't have to worry about them all the time. And we don't have to feel that we have to be on them all the time in order for them to develop well.
It's a very freeing feeling as a parent. We were talking about that extra stress. And I think that's why grandparents are so needed and necessary in our world, is that they've seen it. They've seen the gamut of kids that have grown and people that have changed and people have done this and that. And, so they tend to have that, he's just going through a stage feeling. And I really think that's what I love about your book. It's like, let's look at the long game and not just like from, high school through college and how we set them up for success, type of thing. It's like how we set them up for life success is the most vital thing.
One of the points, all of our worry about our kids, it's about the future. Because whatever they're going through now, if I had a crystal ball, I could say it's going to be hard for them now until next October, and then they're going to be great. That 26th, they're going to be golden. You wouldn't worry about it. You'd say, okay, this is part of their path. What we suggest is you take that long view, and whatever they're going through, don't if you don't get stuck, I'm terrified they're going to get stuck. They usually don't. They usually grow out of stuff. They get into stuff and they get out of it. And so it's safe to take that long to trust development and to trust kids that they want their life to be.
That's great. Well, we could chat all day. I just loved your book.
We'll come back for the next one.
Yes, definitely. Again, we've been chatting with William Stixrud and Ned Johnson. They wrote the book called The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Children More Control Over Their Lives. They have a Facebook page that I'm definitely getting on now that I found out about it. Twitter, and they have theselfdrivenchild.com. But we're going to be sure to connect, social media and website and everything up on our website as well. But thank you so much for connecting with the Luminous Mind and teaching us about parenting and, all those topics that we talked about. I really appreciate your time.
It's really fun talking with you, Rebecca.
Super. I agree.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Music featured in this episode from Scott Holmes. To learn more about our podcast, check us out at theluminousmind.net.